Imagine standing on the edge of an island more than 50,000 years ago. Behind you is everything you know: your family, your hunting grounds, your freshwater, your food. And in front of you is an enormous stretch of moving blue water. There are no maps, no compass, no weather forecast, no rescue boat. You cannot even see exactly where the ocean ends. But somewhere beyond that horizon, there might be another island, more food, more land, or absolutely nothing. Now imagine placing your children, your tools, and nearly everything your family owns onto a floating pile of wood and pushing it into the sea. It sounds like a terrible idea. Yet ancient humans did it. They crossed powerful currents, reached islands separated by deep water, and eventually settled Australia, New Guinea, and some of the most remote islands on Earth. So how did people with stone tools cross an ocean? Did they accidentally float away during a storm? Did they build proper boats? And how did they know where they were going when the destination was hidden beyond the horizon? The answer begins long before the first great ocean voyage. It begins with one very simple discovery: wood floats. The first person who climbed onto a floating log probably discovered two things very quickly. First, a log could carry a human. Second, staying on top of it was surprisingly difficult. But ancient people lived beside rivers, lakes, swamps, and coastlines for thousands of generations. They watched branches drift downstream. They saw fallen trees carrying animals across water. They learned that several logs tied together were more stable than one log. Slowly, floating became rafting. Rafting became paddling. And paddling became travel. Unfortunately, the earliest boats were probably made from wood, bark, bamboo, vines, and other plant materials that normally rot away. No confirmed Pleistocene watercraft has survived, so archaeologists cannot simply dig up a 50,000-year-old boat and examine it. The exact designs remain uncertain, but the people themselves left clues on the islands they reached. Stone tools discovered on Flores date to at least 1 million years ago. More recent discoveries on Sulawesi suggest that archaic humans may have reached that island between about 1.04 and 1.48 million years ago. These islands were separated from mainland Asia by deep ocean channels. Even when sea levels fell, those channels did not completely disappear. Some kind of water crossing had occurred. However, we do not know whether these early travelers deliberately built watercraft or were swept away on natural rafts after floods, storms, or tsunamis. Perhaps a few unlucky individuals climbed onto floating vegetation and accidentally became history's most confused tourists. But when modern humans began moving through Southeast Asia tens of thousands of years later, the evidence becomes much harder to explain as a series of accidents. During the Ice Age, sea levels were lower than they are today. Large areas of western Indonesia were connected to mainland Southeast Asia, creating a region archaeologists call Sunda. Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania were also joined into one enormous landmass, known as Sahul. That sounds convenient. Perhaps ancient humans simply walked from Asia to Australia. But there was a problem. Between Sunda and Sahul lay Wallacea, a world of islands divided by deep water channels. Lower sea levels made some crossings shorter, but they never created a complete land bridge. To reach Sahul, people had to make several sea journeys. Some gaps may have been around 20 or 30 kilometers wide, while at least one crossing approached 100 kilometers. This was not one enormous trip across the entire Pacific. It was more like climbing a staircase made of islands. Reach one island, find water, find food, learn the coastline. Build another craft, then cross to the next island. Each successful journey taught the community something new. Which wood floated best? Which ropes remained strong when wet? Where dangerous currents formed? When the wind changed direction? Which season brought calmer water? And which distant mountain could be seen from the highest hill? Some destinations may have been visible from the shore. A traveler could climb to a high point, spot the faint outline of another island and aim toward it. Researchers modeling possible routes into Sahul found that choosing a favorable departure time and making even modest progress toward a target dramatically increased the chance of arriving safely. On one possible northern route, destination islands could have remained visible during several major crossings, each of which might have taken 2 or 3 days. 2 or 3 days on open water is still terrifying. There is no shade unless you build it. There is no fresh water unless you carry it. One large wave could destroy your supplies, and there is nowhere to stop for a snack. A successful voyage therefore required more than a floating platform. The travelers needed containers for water, food that would not spoil quickly, stone tools for the destination, and enough people to establish a community after arrival. That last part is extremely important. One person washing ashore does not populate a continent. Neither do 3 frightened fishermen who have lost their paddles. Computer models suggest that accidental drifting would require unrealistically large groups to be washed out to sea again and again. Planned departures, directional paddling, and repeated crossings provide a much more convincing explanation for the successful settlement of Sahul. In other words, the first settlers of Australia probably did not arrive while shouting, "Where are we?" They had almost certainly chosen to leave. But what were they travelling in? Rafts made from bamboo or logs are possible. Simple dugout canoes are another possibility. A dugout begins as a large tree trunk. The builders remove wood from the center using stone tools, controlled burning or repeated chopping, until the trunk becomes a long floating vessel. This would have required patience, cooperation, and a very large tree that was having an extremely bad week. Researchers recently tested whether a non-sailing dugout canoe could be created using replicas of Paleolithic tools and used to cross the 110-kilometer channel between Taiwan and Yonaguni Island. The experimental crew successfully crossed one of the world's strongest ocean currents, showing that Stone Age technology was capable of producing a vessel suitable for a difficult open water journey. This does not prove that every ancient community used dugout canoes, but it proves that they could have. Finding the next island was another challenge. For journeys where land remained visible, the destination itself could act as a giant signpost. But ancient humans eventually reached islands that could not be seen from their starting point. The Ryukyu Islands of southwestern Japan were settled around 35,000 to 30,000 years ago. Reaching some of them required travelers to cross the powerful Kuroshio Current toward islands hidden beyond the horizon. Experiments using drifting buoys found that the current did not naturally carry objects toward the islands in a reliable way. The travelers had to move intentionally across it. They were not simply floating, they were navigating. We do not know their exact navigation system. Their knowledge was transmitted orally and left no instruction manual buried in a cave. However, people who spent their lives near the sea would have understood patterns that an inexperienced person might completely miss. The direction of sunrise and sunset, the movement of stars, changing winds, regular ocean swells, clouds forming above distant land, birds flying out to feed in the morning and returning toward land in the evening. Later indigenous Pacific navigators developed these observations into extremely sophisticated systems, using stars, winds, waves, animals, and atmospheric conditions to travel without maps or modern instruments. The ocean was not empty to them, it was filled with information. There is also evidence that early seafarers were not merely trying to survive the water, they were learning to use it. At Jerimalai Cave in Timor-Leste, archaeologists found the remains of pelagic fish, including tuna, dating back approximately 42,000 years. Catching fast-moving fish away from the shore requires planning, maritime knowledge, and some method of reaching deeper water. These people were not standing on a beach hoping a tuna would make a terrible decision. They were going out to find them. Over thousands of years, sea travel became more reliable. Explorers discovered new islands. Fishers returned to productive waters. Communities exchanged tools, food, stories, and marriage partners across channels that had once seemed impossible to cross. Knowledge accumulated. A dangerous experiment performed by one generation became an ordinary journey for the next. Much later, Austronesian and Pacific voyagers developed sailing canoes, outriggers, and multi-hulled vessels capable of carrying people, plants, animals, and supplies across enormous distances. Beginning roughly 3,000 years ago, Lapita-associated voyagers moved into remote Oceania, crossing water gaps hundreds of kilometers wide. Their descendants eventually reached places such as Hawaii, Rapa Nui, and New Zealand. They did not conquer the Pacific because they possessed modern instruments. They succeeded because generations of navigators had transformed the sky and sea into a living map. So how did ancient humans cross the ocean? Not with one miraculous invention, and probably not through endless lucky accidents. They began with rivers and coastlines. They learned that wood could carry them. They tied materials together, carved canoes, made paddles, and studied currents. They waited for favorable conditions. They traveled in groups. They crossed from island to island, turning short journeys into longer ones. And most importantly, they remembered what worked. The first ocean crossings were not simply acts of bravery. They were acts of cooperation, observation, and accumulated knowledge. To us, the ocean can look like a giant barrier separating one world from another. To ancient humans, it slowly became something else, a source of food, a path to new land, and eventually, a road with no footprints.